Well, first of all, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to VAST 2022. And I'm really excited about all the information that we're going to share with you today. This past week, I've had an opportunity to speak to different college groups about what's happening and the trends that we're seeing nationwide, the impact of the pandemic on these kinds of crimes, and it's been great. And so I'm excited for the information you're going to get today, but I just wanted to share a couple things that are happening. In Arizona, we have just under 400 missing children. About a year ago, it was 342. We're up to about 387 missing children. And unfortunately, disproportionately, the children that are missing are children of color. So if 10 children are missing, 6 or 7 would be Hispanic or Black. As Judge Larry King knows, the Native American children, the indigenous people, their children are reported in a different reporting structure. So we have almost 3,000 missing Native American, 22 tribes in Arizona. And that's a whole different problem and statistic, and one that we can't ignore. But when you hear about missing children, that does not include our Native children in Arizona. And it's something we absolutely need to spend time and attention on. Currently, the legislature has dropped about 12 bills. They're in various stages. Some haven't been given numbers yet. So our next meeting, we'll be going over those. But ones that increase penalties, ones that limit access for children online. All good stuff. We'll just see how those go and how they progress and who they get assigned to. But I'm really encouraged by the fact that the legislature is giving this a lot of time and attention, because we, more than anything, need to focus on how predators are accessing our children. For those of you who were with us the last time, we had a case, Jessica Nunez's daughter, Alicia Navarro. Alicia is still missing, and Unsolved Mysteries has reached out, and they are going to be doing a feature story on this. Just September was 2 years, just 4 months ago, that she went missing from Glendale, Arizona. She was 14 at the time, autistic, and there are people working on the case still today, but we still do not know where Alicia is, and it's one of the real tragedies. In the good news category, though, last year, VAST and Project 25 had the opportunity to find 7 missing children. 5 of those children came through the foster care system. So we still see a disproportionate amount of kids in foster care that get into care because they're in a bad situation. And unfortunately, then the situation, because there's people there. One case that comes to mind is that a young girl who was 14, and she met another girl there who had been trafficked, and they took off together. Through Homeland Security and Tucson Police Department, she was located out of Phoenix 5 days later, and we did get to recover her. So that, and I will tell you, that was done through tracking a gift card that she had, and Visa was very cooperative. So each time that we find someone, there's always a little bit different nuance and story. But my hope is that we continue to understand how these crimes are being perpetrated and what we need to do to stop them. So I am going to turn this over to someone who's become a good friend, and that is John Winthrop. He's the co-founder of Double Raven Solutions. And John, I was going to have Greg introduce you and you introduce Greg. Okay. So now that Greg's not here, so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and talk about your transition to your new job and what's going on, and then please start into your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and certainly honored to be here. So since I'm talking about tech, let's prove my ability to see if I can even share my screen. All right, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can. We can see it.
I will introduce myself and by proxy, my business partner. Move that out of the way. So my name is John Winthrop. I work for the I2 Group and also co-founder of Double Raven Solutions. My business partner, Greg Roberts, he unfortunately had an emergency with his daughter, and I won't go into detail with that, but he couldn't be here. So collectively, I work for the I2 Group, and Greg is the CEO of Rizoka, which works in conjunction with I2. Some people know it as Analyst Notebook. And through that collaboration, about a year ago, Greg and I started to discuss the need for developing a company, which is Double Raven Solutions Incorporate. Greg's background, there are some similarities between his and mine. He is a linguist, computational linguist by nature. He's a Georgetown University graduate student. He speaks 27 languages, Aramaic, French, or ancient French, Greek, Latin, all of the Romance languages. And the company he's CEO of, Rizoka, is a unstructured text with syntax. So if you think of an offense report with all the loose narrative, it's the capability of taking that and ingesting it into Analyst Notebook for further analysis. So he and I, through collaboration, about a year ago, decided to develop Double Raven Solutions as a new solution or new approach to how we manage certain things. And I'll walk you through each step of that. In our logo, you'll see runes here, because he also writes in rune, and it literally means to find the nameless and to uncover the lost, which is our objective. And so why we are here? Well, part of what we decided to do with Double Raven as a primary focus was to better understand, if you think of cold case homicides and cold case, sexual assaults, things of that nature, why were they not being solved? And we wanted to focus and do some analysis on that. And part of that required bringing in some cold case homicides and other cold cases, which is how I met Kathleen. And as we analyze and work those cases, we start to reveal why certain things are not done, how they're not done, and what technological advantages can be produced to actually overcome these issues. And to best explain that, I'm going to walk you through, I'm not going to go crazy with statistics or anything of that nature, but I will cite some stats that will should alarm you. They certainly alarm me. What this represents is, if you are familiar with uniform crime reports, which the FBI produces, it's usually a year to a year and a half behind the year that is actually being collected. So these are 2020 crime stats. And what I wanted to show you is the national solve rate, which is a median for homicides, is roughly 60%. Now, again, this is according to Department of Justice based on the FBI uniform crime reports. Now, what they stated in 2017, where the average solve rate was 60%, meaning each agency has their own solve rate. Some are 100%. I know back before COVID, working with Chicago PD, that their solve rate was around 20% pre-COVID. And so now with homicide rates literally topping the charts in many parts of the United States, that number decreases.
And John?
Yes.
Just to that point, I was told by the homicide person in charge of homicide in Maricopa County that ours are up 30%. Okay. So continue, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. Trust me, I'll get to the ugly part of this here very shortly. So if you think of that, so just to tag back, so Double Raven was looking at the 60% unsolved homicides. And so as we would collaborate and partner with certain law enforcement agencies, we were analyzing these 60% or these 40% of unsolved to see what's actually occurring. In the review of a lot of these investigations, we found the answers were right there in front of them. They just did not have one of two things: the right training to understand the value of the data that they had. A simple example, they may have phone toll records with frequency of calls, duration of calls, latitude and longitude of cell towers, things of that nature. But they didn't know how to actually analyze that data to get the answers they're looking for in the questions. And so again, as a median, 40% are unsolved, 60 are being solved. So when we start looking at, this is based on 2020 and then information we obtained through some research and analysis where 2022 projections are looking as a national median rate, which Kathleen just made an excellent point. It's going to be worse than what we thought. So we went from in the 2020 range to solving 60%, 40% unsolved. We're looking now in the 2022 projections to have less than half of all homicides nationally being solved. And at an equally disturbing rate is sexual assaults at that time frame, only a third were being solved. We're looking probably at less than a quarter of all sexual assaults nationally being solved. Now, why is this important? Because in 2017, the Department of Justice, at the 60% solve rate, deemed it a crisis. And so if we're now even worse off, less than half of homicides and potentially a quarter of sexual assaults being solved, that's beyond a crisis. Choose whatever word you want to best describe that. This is not good. So this fit really well into what Double Raven was doing, is not only trying to understand why things were not solved, but actually build the technological solutions. And before I go any further, I didn't provide information about my background, so which will help. So Greg Roberts, my business partner, in his background, his technological capabilities and development, I have over 30 years experience in law enforcement myself. Former United States Secret Service, was tasked with them to develop their counterintelligence branch, which included counterespionage as well, and then developed a program for the White House for counterintelligence in a specific area. Local law enforcement as well, 17 years, almost 18 years. And then I'm also a retired military. I had served with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations as a special agent. I have a master's degree in counterterrorism. And the natural law enforcement progression you would see, I actually got recruited and went to Twitter. I was their head of threat and intelligence and investigations at Twitter at the peak of ISIS use of that platform, where death threats would be made and then accounts would be suspended, and then they would turn around and direct death threats against the CEO and then actually issued a fatwa to harm Twitter employees globally wherever they may be found. So with that background, and then eventually went to work for IBM, and now I2 is its own independent company, and I'm the client executive for law enforcement engagement in North America. So between Greg's and my background and technological capabilities, we both also worked in the intelligence community. So we started applying our skill sets to see how much of a bigger impact we can make given the circumstances that we're seeing. Now, it's something I put together here just to simply explain something. So people should be familiar with a paradigm shift. A paradigm is where your normal active day-to-day operations can reach a plateau and they sort of reach an even keel or a plane. And then new procedures or new technology will come in and help leverage and take it further. So you'll see on the left here, I have the year 2000 up to 2021. And you'll see that around 2000, so problem-oriented policing and community-oriented policing as philosophies had come up, late 90s, early 2000s. And so you have philosophies that take place that helps change a paradigm and bring it into a shift. And then you also have technology. So the technology box around here is usually very helpful when you're shifting from one paradigm to another. So prior to problem-oriented policing and community-oriented policing, you had traditional policing. So these, as philosophies come into play, that helps shift, and it goes into another shift. Well, technology doing the same thing. If you look in the 2010 to 2021 region, you have AFIS, automatic fingerprint identification system. Prior to that, it was manual. mobile data terminals in vehicles, you have license plate readers. So technology does play a role as paradigms tend to shift. And then you have an X factor where it plateaus off, where technology is not there. The industry as a whole needs to look for these and then insert themselves where they can benefit that shift in itself. Well, we jump to today in current times where instead of a shift, it's literally a cliff. And you have multiple varying factors that are contributing to this, where that ease of transition is no longer an ease, it's more of a cliff, and it leaves a tremendous void of how do you get from one area to another. So if you think about different parts of the country, you have mandatory vaccination, you have attrition. A lot of people are leaving law enforcement as a whole, which is a knowledge bank that leaves with them. We have open borders here in Arizona with over 130 different countries, forged identifications. You've got reimagine the police, defund the police. So all of these occurring at one time. It's not a paradigm shift. One could say it's a critical paradigm shift, or some could make the argument that it's a system failure. You also factor in no bonds or reduced bonds, no charges. We've all seen on TV where you have people walking in, grabbing $1,000 worth of stuff out of Walgreens or Rite Aid, putting in a bag and walking directly out of the store. No prosecutions. So all of these feed into what we're seeing right now. And so as it relates to technology, well, technology is now trying to catch up with all of these things happening simultaneously. But what do we do? How do we affect it best? And so we think we have some solutions to do that. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So some of the things that we've identified that are desperately needed was, and before I go down this list, the two predominant things that continue to come up over and over and over again was training and tools. And so at least the police department that I worked for before I went to Secret Service, the model there would be you do 3 years on the street as a patrol officer before you can apply for specialty positions like investigations or special investigations, narcotics units, and the like. So others, once they were in investigations, let's say they stay there for 10 years or the remaining of their career. Other models are you do 3 years in investigations, you come off the street, you rotate to another position, and so on and so forth. So the third, although it varies between agencies, we found is that knowledge transfer of someone that's been there for a career. Someone comes in new and they have zero visibility, or at least transfer that knowledge of how to work certain investigations or best practices utilized by homicide, sex crimes. And although I'm referring back and forth to homicide and sex crimes, when it relates to human trafficking, which is another staple that we're highly focused on in cases that we've worked as well, there's overlapping crimes. So narcotics, human trafficking, deaths, sexual assaults, all of it is in one big bundle if you use human trafficking as an umbrella as a whole. So some of the things that we've noted that are needed in the industry, at least these technological advancements, one of which is the quick ability to search all data in a meaningful and visual way. So visual analytics, which falls under the umbrella of data science. There's multiple elements of data science. One of them is the visualization of data, which we found is much more intuitive for your investigators. The investigate, analyze by asking questions of the data. So earlier I had mentioned, if you have, like Cellbrite phone toll data, and you're asking questions, it could be questions that you're asking with the data of, out of all of these contacts, I only want to know the two most prominent. Or in a past investigation, I noted that there were call and hangups, which was a clue, or at least a signal to say the phone call that's following this is going to be me, so they're not going to introduce themselves. So you have little indicators and things like that. So if I have tremendous amounts of data from multiple different cell providers or phone providers, and I'm weeding through that, if I'm looking for certain anomalies or certain patterns or trends, it's the ability to do that. Moreover, the training we've seen is significantly lacking throughout the United States in understanding the value of the data that investigations are acquiring through subpoenas. It could be phone data, it could be any number of different things, but it's the lack of understanding of that value and then the lack of tool to be able to make that data accessible to ask questions of. It could be temporally, such as a chronological order of what happened first, who introduced themselves. I mean, think of any scam you can think of in human trafficking where you have recruiting, you have grooming, you have all of these stages, and you wanted to spell that out in the chronological order of what happened and who was engaged with who. It's having the ability to ask questions like that of the data that you have and get those answers. Another way is to quickly capture victimology-based signatures. So this is a little more complex, but I do have some slides. I'll actually just save the slides to help explain victimology and moreover signatures as a whole. Signatures not to be confused with handwriting, but signatures in the context of if you think of serial killers, there's a modus operandi and then there's the signature of the killer. So if we think of Jack the Ripper, if he starts off strangling people and then moves to slitting their throats, that would be the MO. The signature, the behavior behind the reason why he's doing that never changes, but the MO can. And so we've developed some technological capabilities to allow to understand not just the MOs, but the signatures of these people. It'll make more sense here in a few more slides. Also a way to quickly capture offender-based signatures. So victimology is understanding the victims, offender-based signature is understanding the offenders. And so when you have the two to compare to each other, which again, a couple slides here, I'll get more into detail, but it allows you to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and fully understand not only victims, but also the offenders. Things that are incorporated in a offender signature, everything from the FBI number, blood types, DNA if it's on there, plus a bunch of other information that will make more sense here shortly. And then again, the behavior observed and unobserved. At Twitter, one of the things, the most challenging thing is most of these accounts are anonymized. So I developed a methodology to be able to identify the actual person behind these anonymized accounts, assess where they're physically located, and then assess the capability of carrying out those threats. That led into applying that methodology in what I'll be describing here in a moment to help understand behavior-based and intelligence-based investigative and intelligence analysis. The other thing I forgot to mention, I'm also a professor at Norwich University. I teach intelligence and investigative analysis utilizing the tools that I'm referencing. And we did actually use Jack the Ripper as a case study and actually successfully built out everything that I'm describing to you. A lot of fun, very interesting, but also very challenging. I'd also add that one of the needs is the ability to access all information in an intuitive manner. So new officers coming in that are, in the millennial age range where they're literally reared with, Apple devices and all the different type of technology where we didn't even use calculators when I was in grade school. So there's a big leap in technology where it's much more intuitive. And so we've learned that the more intuitive we can make something, the faster the learning curve is in utilizing these materials. And there's a multitude of ways of actually making that happen, which is built into the technology that I'm referencing. And then analytical functions must include geospatial, temporal, link, and other forms of analysis. There's more than one type of analysis. There's an abundance from geospatial with the Jack the Ripper data that we were playing with at the university. We actually put together a geospatial profiling attempt where if you think of serial killers, you have disorganized killers, organized killers, and there are attributes that fall within that. So if you have a radius, for example, disorganized killers may kill within a 5-mile radius of where they live or work. And so information and signature profiles that we incorporate in that allow us to actually apply emerging technologies and methodologies to literally take us from where we are now into the future. So many of you may have seen this before. It's easily or commonly referenced as the iceberg. And if you haven't seen it, I'll just give you a quick tutorial on it. So when you go on the internet, what we call the surface web, that's about 4% of the total content that you would actually get. This is the top of the iceberg. So the surface web has your Google, your search engines, very common things that you find here. And then 90%, the bulk of information is in the deep web. So these are non-accessible via search engines. So this could be anything from what you'll see with third-party data providers like Spokio, PIPL, Zava Search, things like that, where they're taking divorce information, utilities information, things of that nature, which is publicly available, difficult to find. It is cultivated and then sold as a product. And then you have a lot of subscription information, medical information, information at schools, et cetera. And then 6% of the internet consists of encrypted networks. We call it the dark web. This is where a lot of human trafficking activity occurs, where you need special software. I was going to say you don't have to have it. You could definitely delve into the dark web without protecting yourself, but you're inviting a huge problem as a result. So the Onion Router or Tor are typical tools that you use to go and examine data that is found on the dark web. You have PII information where you hear about these hacks. That data from databases is there. It can be purchased and sold. You have people that are anonymized through multiple different security protocols to prevent their true identity, but information can be sold, as well as illegal activity of counterfeit pharmaceutical drugs, to human trafficking, to the grooming and things that we spoke of earlier. Also drug trafficking, a lot of drug trafficking now. Your drug traffickers, well, with the border, it's easier than it's ever been. But just prior to the border, they were going into a lot of counterfeit pharmaceutical sales that are laced with fentanyl and other things like that. So this is what the internet consists of in each of their own quadrants. So what does that mean? Well, your average investigator typically is only accessing 80% of the 90% available, and that's with search engines, things like that. So for the most part, like LinkedIn, if they have an account, it's easy to get information from there, but you have to have certain devices and techniques and sources for your Twitter, Facebook. Skimming devices, there are services that are out there as well, and that takes care of that 4%. But most of your information that's gleaned, I would say with a small percentage of the upper part, is what investigators, detectives are looking for or obtaining. Some have superior skills, surpassing mine, but the average median is probably, you're looking at maybe 40% of information that's being done without tools or without training to get what they need to do. OSINT, open source intelligence collection, a good example of that. And then your dark web, where you have encrypted networks, and I had referenced Tor, but this activity down here speaks more to the behavioral. And then again, what officers are looking for is typically what's observed by the public, and then you have what's virtual. And so why I put this in here is when you think of the totality of a person, and we'll use a victim. So if we have a young girl who is highly active in the virtual world, she has different personas, different names, and she's out interacting with people in a sexual context through a variety of different websites. Their parents, friends, and schoolmates had be maybe oblivious to this type of activity. When police make contact and they get information from that parent, the parent's giving them what they know, what's observed by the public and friends, and are oblivious to what's going on up here. And then when you go into the deep web, then it kind of speaks to the behavioral. So things may change up here, like I said, with an MO and a signature, and the behavior may be completely unknown. And the behavior is what drives what's happening up here. And the behavior also changes how people observe them on a day-to-day basis.
John?
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you go back? So that adds up to 90%. So is the 10% in the behavioral? And I'm just not seeing it on your.
Yeah, that's probably me whipping this out pretty quick. So,
okay.
Yeah. I've often said I'm not great at math, which is why I went into law enforcement. So we can chalk it up to that.
I just wanted it to add up to 100. So I
appreciate that.
Okay.
All right.
Got
So
it.
here's 100% because I didn't put the percentage in there. So
Okay,
we'll
good.
work with that. So what I'd like you to think now is the totality of a person, right? So the virtual person, the observed person, and the behavior person. And this applies both to victims and our predators. So if you have a predator down here as a convicted sex offender, they're setting up accounts in the virtual world. They, as a matter of fact, I can speak to this personally, testifying in grand jury on a death threat against the President of the United States. This person had 5 different Facebook accounts. Family and friends were aware of one. He had a whole other personality, different name on another, and then the other 3 spoke to 3 other different types of personas that he was perpetuating. And so if law enforcement has access, which is training and the tools to be able to collect as much information as possible as it relates to their investigation, there's open source intelligence. Again, it's open source, but if you have the training and technology to do it, that's one thing. And then other things, obviously, through the legal process of subpoenaing accounts and things of that nature, the legal process. Again, it all combines together. But to be able to take all of that information from multiple different data sources and disparate data sources, and then have it make sense and accessible to you is what we're getting at. So what I'm saying is, in the future, we're working towards the ability to be able to build a signature of a person, what their activity is on the internet, what their activity is in the deep web, the behavioral attributes that are driving. So for example, the young female example, there could be any number of reasons what has occurred to her that drives the behavior to act out in other ways. And again, the observed behavior. And so when you have all of that together, so you have DNA, FBI, blood type, profile, understand who they are here, understand who they are here, and understand the behavioral contributions to why they're doing what they're doing, whether a victim or an offender, then we're actually getting the totality of data that allows us to create solid victimology profiles. So if you think of educating young ladies and boys that are out there on what the dangers are, I've seen many different pamphlets for counter human trafficking, and they're touching the surface, if you will. They're touching that 4% of information. They're not going into greater depth, which is much needed. And as well as law enforcement understanding the signature, the totality of an offender, of how they operate, what's driving it. Is it money-based? Is it deviant-based? What's there? And then when you answer those 2 questions and you're able to ask meaningful questions of the data, you're getting the answers that you need to not only help prevent human trafficking, but from a victimology standpoint, but you're also much more capable of identifying offenders and networks that they're involved in to resolve that as well. So how do we do that? So what Greg and I put together is, if you think of day-to-day operations in a police department, so you have paper documents, so you have your own data that you're developing, so offense reports, field interrogation cards, supplements, all of the things that are generated, all the different databases, whether you make a hard copy from that or a digital copy. So you have digital documents over here. So I'll find my cursor. So you have paper documents and digital documents. Paper documents particularly apply to your older cases where paper generated police departments. It's not digitized, it's not current, but it's still accessible through an OCR capability of making that older documents digitized and then incorporate that. So incorporating a full text search engine, without going into great detail, what it does is it allows you to build a database of all of the cases that you have. This doesn't necessarily mean your RMS or CAD system. It's the cases that you're working on, or multiple cases. So you can literally load all of that regardless of the format of the data and be able to search each and every one of those types of documents in a meaningful way. Same thing with external data sources. RMS and CAD are typical, but you also have third-party data providers like LexisNexis, Clear, TLO, Hooster, motor vehicle department, anything that's generating data or has a data source associated with it. You also have imagery of CCTV. There's still imagery from crime scenes, MVD photos, things of that. So it's taking anything and everything, regardless of the format, bringing it in so that it's searchable. It's tagged, for example, if it's addresses or anything with an address, then it's also geocoded so that it produces a latitude and longitude for that, so that it can now be mapped and plotted. I know one sheriff's office in particular was really concerned with the vast area that they had to police, where if they're looking for bodies, they could be in mines, they could be dropped in bodies of water, ditches, and the ability to not only pinpoint hot areas, but also pinpoint areas that have already been searched. And so to be able to incorporate all of that, it's all data in the end, to be able to layer that data so that your investigators have access to meaningful, timely information. Moreover, intuitively able to access anything and everything in that case file, bring it forth, and then the analytical tools that go along with it. And then Odin is what we're currently developing, not just this process, but this process that's the secret sauce that allows all of it to work in a meaningful way, which is open source data intelligence network is how we refer to it.
So John?
Yes.
Because this is really technical and you're doing a great job, and is there a way that, like with what you just said, that you could kind of say like what that looks like in a case? So
yeah.
If there's a missing person and the police agency comes to you and brings you all this data, and you assimilate the data, what did they get back, or what does that look like, so it kind of can connect people to what you just said? Is that okay?
Yeah. Detective has a thumb drive with a terabyte of data on it. That's all of the information on the case. Paper doesn't apply if it's on a thumb drive. It's all digital. So you have spreadsheets in there, you have documents, you have bolos that they've sent out, you have private investigator tips. So you have unstructured data, which is the narrative, and then you have structured data, which you find in spreadsheets. They also have some imagery, some video, some photographs, a missing person, all the photos, last known photos of that missing person, CCTV from multiple areas that were searched, or tips that came in. What we do is we take all of that data, we enter it into Odin, and then it allows that detective to have their complete case file or multiple cases, whether they're related or not, to put into the system so that it has a front end that allows them to search for information. And the next slide kind of speaks to literally what this.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I didn't want to stop your part.
Yeah. So subpoenas, everything I just described, warrants, all that stuff, everything that you're doing, everything that's being produced as a result of the investigation, continues to come in. So let's say for this example, you have AT&T, mobile, 4 different phone providers. So the formats are different. And so what we're doing in the process of the previous slide is we're actually building parsers that allow that data to come in, to be organized and modeled in a specific way, so that the detective doesn't have to be a data scientist and know that part. They just have to be able to plug in their thumb drive and then load the data, which is loaded automatically, and then it becomes searchable. And for an example, in that case, what they would view is, for let's say it's your investigations sergeant or commander, and they want to know their persons crimes, sex crimes, auto theft, burglary, different divisions within investigations, all of those cases in there. They want to see a dashboard or a simple explanation. Let's say they have 200 cold case homicides and they load all 200 cases in. Then what we also do would score each case based on the evidence in the case on what are the most workable cases in order of higher point that we do that. For example, let's say DNA equals 70 points, blood or fingerprints, things of that nature, that have capabilities of further leveraging that type of evidence to a known person. And so in that specific case, out of the 200 cases, we would categorize the cases based on their workability so that that supervisor can then assign those cases based on the workability where the harder cases below. In the process, utilizing this technology, as they get used to working the easier workable cases, the harder cases become easier because they've already worked through a lot of the problems that's built into the technology. So the supervisor has a view of the totality of all the cases, whereas typically right now they're either in boxes or they don't really have an understanding of what cases should take precedence over others. And a dashboard is created for that. So if you're doing CompStat or anything similar to that, where you're reporting up on your solvability rate, to include identifying what your solvability rate is on cases solved and open and unsolved cases, and as they emerge through. That way you have your own report card. And this goes back to an old adage I learned way back in the day, that if you don't measure it, it doesn't count. If it doesn't count, it's not reflected in your strategic plan. If it's not in your strategic plan, it doesn't have support, funding, or visibility. And so with the information, it builds the justification for the training and tools necessary, because you're measuring your own productivity and what you're capable of doing across the spectrum of all different types of crimes. Same technology is not limited to human trafficking, cold homicide cases, serial killer. It's any and all types of crime that you have to work with. And in each case, prior to prosecution, we're actually currently trying to develop the specifics to this, so that not only, let's say with the cold cases, you have 200 cases, but based on the type of evidence you have, we're in the process of building out a library of solved cases, prosecuted cases. What were the elements of that prosecution that made them successful? What was the evidence in those? And so we kind of give you a scorecard of the case as it currently stands has this percentage of likelihood of prosecution. But if you do these extra steps, it increases the likelihood of prosecution based on the type of evidence that's built in that case.
So John, if you had, let's say, 5 officers in a department working on this and using this system, and they're all independent, would your system be able to draw any case like similarities? So Officer A is not Officer B, C, D, and E, and then Officer B, C, and D have similar profiles or similar information. Would you then be able to share that with the officers, or does each case stay separate? So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, all of the above. The bulk of my career has been in as a working manager, if you will. I worked cases and managed my teams as well. So as a manager, I would look at, if I have 5 detectives, 5 investigators, and the cases that are not going through the prosecution and it's falling on one person and not the other 4, I have the capability of seeing that. The other is, if there are certain things that are occurring within that data, and if we go back, right? So if I have one officer that's got the trainings, got the tools, and they're looking at the totality, that entire signature of that person. The reason that we speak to this, to kind of answer your question, is at Twitter, if you had a person, because all of these accounts are anonymized, if you have a person that has the capability of doing, making death threats, or in this case, they're an offender, they commit certain crimes and they're incarcerated for a while, or they leave a platform or whatever, but when they reemerge, their signature is easy to pick up because it's unique to that one person and only that one person. And so if I answer your question correctly, not only in which officers are producing these cases to a workable prosecution, but understanding the skill levels and then being able to identify what skill levels they need to do to increase those. And then others, even if they're unrelated cases, 5 different types. So I've a narcotics officer, and I've got sex crimes officer. that is working on cases that where drugs are involved, but they never see the unforeseen connection between the cases. If all of them are together, then you will see those unforeseen connections, whether it's addresses. We think of it as people, places, and things. So you've got not just but the people, but the places that are frequented. And you think of the 80-20 rule, where 20% of your people are committing 80% of the crimes. Sometimes that's geo-specific, certain areas that they're in. Or it could be where I've also witnessed where you have organized crime that travels from one location to another location, preys on that location, goes back, and it significantly increases the ability to identify who they are because it's not in your local database. I would say that what's currently happening with the border, where again, 130 different countries, where some countries are unloading their prisons, you don't have the criminal background on these people. You don't have them in your system at all. If they're even using their true name, and the abundance of fictitious IDs and passports that are coming across the border as well, it's making it harder. Back when we were solving 60% of the crimes, it's significantly contributing to the ability to identify who these people are, which is the only reason why I bring up the Twitter, where you have an unknown person, but tremendous amount of activity and noted behavior. That's where this stuff comes in, is you may know the behavior, you may know the activity, but you have no idea who they are until you do, build that bridge and then make the identification, and then it all seems together in one significant signature.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
So I am done throwing technical terms at you, and subject to any questions that you may have, and happy to, again, honored to be here and happy to answer any questions you might have.
I think everyone, you just got like credit for law enforcement, whether you need the law enforcement course or not, because that was a lot of technology. And John, it's definitely needed. I think we're a year away from a Super Bowl again. We did this dance a while ago, and Judge King has a question for you. So
always, yes, John, good presentation, sir.
Thank you.
You talked about open source, but we don't talk about other sources of information that may be out there. And this is great that we can utilize, as you say, Tor and some of the dark web stuff. But is that not a process where we can probably bring that up to determine if they're using, sex rings, trafficking? Because I'm thinking about what happens when I have people go to the casinos and it's like, I want to deliver somebody, but they're not going to put it out on a normal channel. They'll use encrypted communication, et cetera, to hook up their person with the John going forward. Can that be utilized and tracked?
Judge, my best response to your question is, so having worked not only military, but local and federal law enforcement. And so one of the typical, without going into great detail on sources and methodologies, when I refer to OSINT, open source intelligence, right, anybody and everybody has access to that.
Right.
So a well-trained person in OSINT knows the tradecraft involved in how to find certain things, legally open to everybody if you know where to look. That kind of sets the stage, number one, as finding information that's specific and germane to your investigation. That may lead to accounts that would then be subpoenaed. Even if it's encrypted conversations, then that provider would then be subpoenaed for that data. So if you think of it in easy, easier, and harder, you start with what's easiest and free, because law enforcement is not raining money. So it's utilizing these technologies and tradecraft training and tools to get what's fast and easily accessible. That, if that builds probable cause to the activity that you're, whatever type of investigation you're working on, and it does lead to the accounts, then you go straight to the legal part, go through the process, acquire the legal tools necessary to obtain that information, and then it continues on. So that by the time it gets to court, for example, in testifying in a grand jury, I spoke to literally what I just described. The methodology that I used to find certain information, how I did it, what the accounts was, burned my undercover name in the process, showed that subpoenaed the accounts, it led to it. So it is a chronological order and is a proven methodology. Forensical, if you look back, anybody could have produced it if they followed the same process.
Sounds good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Judge.
And John, I'm going to share your information with people, so if they have questions afterwards, or if an agency wants to talk to you directly. And
certainly, I'll put in the chat, I'll put my the best email address to reach me.
Thank you so much. And I just want, John and I have worked on several cases, and I couldn't duplicate a word that he just said, but I just do appreciate the results, because we found missing people, and ultimately when you're looking for missing children, you want the very best people. And so, John, I want to say again, thank you to you and Greg, and I'm glad that you have now an opportunity to do this full time, because you were doing this on the side. So that's the most exciting thing as we head into this year, that you're getting to do this work that clearly you have passion for full time. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm long in tooth, as George Washington once said, in my career. So it has everything to do with, that patriotic sense. I've served my country, in so many different ways for the bulk of the entirety of my adult life. And I'm at a point, and Greg, speaking for him as well, we know what needs to be done. We know how difficult it is. And there's no one on the horizon that we're seeing that has stepped up to the tip of the spear to understand it and break through this. And so between, again, a good chunk of my career was, if you think of counterintelligence and counterespionage alone, you're trying to find people that are trained not to get caught, and they have resources to ensure they're not get caught. And if you're successful in those endeavors, when you're looking for human traffickers, a little bit easier, but all of the knowledge and capabilities along the way, when you apply it in this manner, which most local law enforcement agencies don't do. So we took on the challenge of being able to not only make a difference, because it's so crucially needed right now because of what I explained. There are different things happening in the United States now than they have, at least in my lifetime, in the past. Things are different. It requires something different. We believe we've got our arms wrapped around that. And as we become more and more public down the road, things will be much more available. And we're doing this purely because it needs to be done. There's no one else doing it. And we just want to make a difference. We want to help.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person that we're going to hear from is Chief of Police Rich Jester. And Rich is a good friend and the Chief of Police in San Luis, Arizona. And if you don't know where that is, it's in Yuma County. And he can talk for hours about the border. And so, Rich, if you would just update us on what's happening with border trafficking, trafficking at the border, and you just have taken over a role as I don't know if I'll say this right, as the Chief of the Chiefs. Is that a fair way to say what you're doing?
That would probably be a very fair way of saying what I'm doing.
So, and I think in John's presentation, he told us 130 countries. I believe it's up to 160 something. So I'll let you update us on, just give us a brief update on what's happening in our state, and what the chiefs of police in the state are doing to help keep us safe.
Well, right? You're right. I can talk for hours, and that would be a very tall order. So, I mean, if Chief Solberg from Gilbert was still, who is still on the throne until this coming Friday, I'm sure that Mike would tell you that things are moving at a very rapid pace, obviously, with what's going on at the legislative branches and some of the things that we're going to have to look at and combat. But for those of you that don't know, San Luis is the largest city on the border with 40,000 plus residents. We have had the luxury of having a fence for quite a long period of time, and a very good fence. So those of you that want to know what the prototype fence was actually designed after, San Luis and our stretch was pretty close to what the prototype was when President Trump decided to extend that fence to go from there. As most of you know, it's not a secret, the amount of traffic that now is coming across our border. We're looking at 2,000 per day. We are the Rio of Texas. And along with that, it's what we call a lot of give ups. And with that comes a lot of those that we don't catch. And so I'll talk about the give ups first. Literally, these are family units and singles coming across the border. Their sole purpose is to give themselves up. And we have seen a dynamic shift in the economic resources that these folks have. This is not people that are poor. These are very middle class to upper middle class from a variety of foreign countries. 15 of those countries so far have been identified as radicalized countries where terrorism affects those countries. But you have pretty close to 56 different countries that are represented right now, that are people that are crossing the border. And again, Border Patrol is completely taxed out with the things that they have to do. Because of that issue, we sit right in this corner of the corridor that has California on one side, Arizona here, Mexico on the other side of the Colorado River, of which now you can just literally walk across the river because of the water rights and everything being siphoned off to Nevada, California, and Arizona. You literally have people that can walk across with their families in groups of 20, 30, hundreds. That's what we are seeing every single day. These people come across the river, come into the fields, destroy crops that are being grown that get sent out all over the United States. And then they're processed. And depending on whether or not they're getting Title 42 and sent back to their foreign country, such as the Haitians right now, you have other people that are being flown back out of the country once they're processed. You have some people that are being released back into Mexico as part of the reenactment of what the Supreme Court just voted on. And so you get some of those. Many of these people are vetted. Once they're vetted, then they're sent to either sponsoring families across the country where their court dates are anywhere from 4 to 5 years out. That's what we're looking at right now. Unfortunately, because of all of those types of things, human trafficking, obviously, when you get them across, those of you that are familiar with what's going on in the cartels across the border know that they control every single inch of that border, and there's money transactions every single second of the day to get people across. And depending on where you go across, depends on what you pay to what cartel. The Sinaloa cartel being the largest of the groups that are down our particular way, we are seeing a sharp rise in homicides across the border. We just had photographs today of a young lady that was probably in her mid to late 20s that was dressed very nicely, who was a victim of homicide as well. You don't know how the Mexican government is investigating those homicides as far as that's concerned, because it's in the desert areas. We don't know if they're tying it into a cartel. We don't know if this is a person that didn't pay for their trafficking fees, didn't pay across the border, and those types of situations that people face every single day over there. It is a multi-billion-dollar business for the cartel, and humans and sex trafficking right now is the ticket because it's reoccurring as far as economic value is concerned to them, to where they can continue to get that. Whereas drugs coming across the border are at all-time highs. When you have unmanned sections of the border, you have a lot of people coming through. We have recently taken fentanyl pills that number in the 5,000 to 6,000 off of high school students. We have one of the highest suicide death rates in the state right now per capita with young people under the age of 18. We recently just had to administer 4 shots of Narcan to a high school student that dropped inside of his high school classroom. So those are the things that we begin to face, because cartels also know that when you have juvenile offenders, they go to juvenile courts, and the process at that particular time is not obviously seen as an adult court. Therefore, many times there are other options for juvenile court systems to use to adjudicate those particular cases as far as that's concerned. When it comes to recognizing what is going on in the human and sex trafficking sections down here, we have not prosecuted any of those types of cases in 3 to 4 years at the county attorney's office. We have no cases. We're actually working on a case with 2 sisters right now that we believe are being trafficked by their father. He's sending them over to Mexico and then bringing them back. And so you see it kind of crossways down here. You see those that may be coming to the United States to be sex trafficked, but you also see people going across the border who are sex trafficked and then come back across the border as well. So those are some of the dynamics that we're facing with down here as far as that's concerned. And I think I think John hit it right on the numbers. Obviously down here, every single department in this state, manpower has become a problem. And so when you start throwing resources, the first thing that you throw resources at is the guy that's on patrol. And for many of those people that are on patrol, they don't have the training other than what our post academies are training them for 16 hours is all they get in any type of human or sex trafficking. Kudos to DPS. They've come up with a program that now is addressing their boots on the ground as far as that's concerned, with training their on patrol officers to recognize the signs of human and sex trafficking and what these women look like. And so you don't have a lot of detective resources to throw at this particular problem. And to John's things too, you may not have people within your detective departments that understand the analytical issues and where to go get that information. It moves around all the time. So developing those types of tools that actually can cut corners for law enforcement, I think is a tremendous advantage for those of us that are considered medium-sized departments and small departments who don't have budgets to throw at that particular issue. And we know that human sex trafficking it's the crime that happens right in front of us every single day. We just don't recognize it. So I think training and getting those things, and of course, obviously, as we look at what Washington is going to do with executive orders and how the needle is going to move for law enforcement when it comes to use of force, community-oriented policing programs, and some of the things that may be included into that particular executive order. How do we adjust in the law enforcement community to what they're going to throw at us and what DOJ is going to throw at us, and how that filters to the state, and how we look at it from an organization like the Chiefs of Police, and how we're going to get ahead of this particular problem. And I think more so understanding what's going on and how these people move within the web, because I think that probably in the next 5 to 10 years, many of the crimes that we investigate are going to be moving to the web, and that's how crime is going to be committed. And we need to understand and wrap our arms around that. And I think we're way behind the curve when it comes to that. And that's the education and training that I think that we need. But what comes across our borders when it comes to human and sex trafficking, and when it comes to drug, infiltrates your communities up in the valley. It comes from down here. We've got great relationships with HSI. Mayorkas was here today flying around my city, and I just don't know what kind of help I'm going to be able to get from Washington, but at least know that there are those of us in the fight that are trying to put it out there to know that this is a problem that needs to be solved very quickly, and we don't have the resources, need the resources to do it, and we'll see where the legislators go from there. So, Kathleen, that kind of gives you a roundabout.
How many chiefs of police do we have in Arizona? How many different entities or cities or how many cities or municipalities are represented in your organization?
Well, you have 178 law enforcement organizations, and then you have the sheriff's organizations as well. So if you take one chief for every one of those organizations, but many of those organizations being larger, obviously you have deputy chiefs, assistant chiefs that are able to spread some of that wealth too. But a vast majority of the chiefs in Arizona are their chiefs. They may have a commander, a captain, or somebody that's maybe second in command. And so the goal is to get as many of those chiefs actually on board as we possibly can. We do have a great representation when it comes to the chiefs of Arizona. Many of them are on board, either part of the organization or have a representative that's in the Arizona Association of Chiefs of Police that come to our meeting. Our quarterly meeting is up in Mesa this particular Friday as well. So we do have great representation, and the chiefs communicate quite well. Obviously with Ken there at Mesa, with Mike there at Gilbert, Scotty, Terry, you can just start naming the people that are always involved with what the chiefs of police do. And obviously they look at it from a much larger perspective when it comes to what's happening within their larger cities, to those of us that are medium, to even the smaller ones. But we've got good representation across the board. and we pretty well speak with one mind. John Thomas, who's our lobbyist and attorney, and Eric and Bill, who is our attorneys as well, represent law enforcement, do a very good job at representing us when it comes to these types of issues.
Well, just good luck to you this next year, and we will be hearing from you again. And thank you for your focus, not only on the border, but as it relates to trafficking. And I just appreciate all the work that you and all the officers do in the state. That's why we exist. And just thank you, and keep up the great work, because I know there's days where there's not enough bodies and people and resources to do what you're doing, and you do the job anyway. So thank you. So
I appreciate it, Kathleen. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from, I see Pastor Mike is here, and from Night of Hope, and or Niece. And Mike, are you going to be the one speaking, or is Niece is? I see you there. Hi, hon. So do you want to tell us about this year's Night of Hope? It's I don't even know what annual it is. Is it fifth?
Fourth.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
So I'll let you go ahead and share that. And I think we had a flyer and stuff that we could put up. But go ahead, Niece. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Pastor Mike, I don't know if you wanted to kick it off or if you'd like me to.
And let me just say, thank you for, everybody on this call and the fight that you're doing. And I'm just, it just can seem overwhelming, and that just spurs me even more, knowing that we have to continue and engage more people in things like the Night of Hope and bring awareness. And so I want everyone on this call to know we have an army of people praying for you. And now, as I get these names, you'll be prayed for by name. Okay. And so just thank you. Thank you for what you do and all that you're doing in your service. So Niece will give the details of the Night of Hope 4.
Yes. Thanks, Pastor Mike.
Thanks, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for having us, Bethel Church, representing here this afternoon. I'm Niece Jackson. I'm the ministry leader at Bethel Church and the director of Night of Hope. This is our 4th annual Night of Hope, where we are shining the light in the darkness of human trafficking. This is an annual event that has been birthed by my very own pastor, Mike Gowans, who's on with us today. And it is a means for us to really unite the churches and elected officials, law enforcement, frontline ministries who are active in the fight, like yourselves here in the East Valley and in the state of Arizona. It's a night of raising awareness, activating our community, and praying for our state and country for the recovery of and restoration of our victims, the protection of our children, and that justice be brought to these perpetrators. So during the first 3 years, we've averaged over 1,200 or so attendees at this event in our community, and it has really truly united the East Valley. Last year, even during the pandemic, we had over 5,000 viewers at our live stream event and over 1 million impressions on the Night of Hope website. So we are making an impact to the community. We're uniting the Valley. We've united over 30 churches in the Valley. And this year, we're going to be partnering with an organization called In Our Backyard. And it's an organization that is focused on anti-trafficking efforts through awareness and outreach to recover missing children. This firm is specifically supported by the NFL host committee. So they travel to every city host for the Super Bowl to rally the community. They create a volunteer team to canvass the metropolitan area about 10 days prior to the Super Bowl and visit with as many convenience stores such as Quick Trip and Circle K, et cetera, to put freedom stickers in every restroom stall and equip the cashiers with a pamphlet that has pictures of missing children and a hotline to help law enforcement locate and recover these victims. So, as you know, in 2023, Phoenix is hosting the Super Bowl. And Cheryl Psyche, in our Backyard's executive director, will be speaking at our Night of Hope this year on February 6th. And in addition to our very own Kathleen Wynn, who's going to be speaking as well, Jan Edwards from Paving the Way Foundation, who's focused on educating our youth on predatory behavior on social media, and several elected officials. We are going to be rallying our community once more this year in preparation for Night of Hope 5 in 2023, which we're hoping and praying that it is going to be hosted. We're declaring right now that we are going to be hosting at the ASU Stadium, and we'll have thousands of attendees, even more so than ever before, with hopes to really unite the Phoenix metropolitan area and let these perpetrators know that we will not allow this atrocity of human trafficking with the statement, "Not in our city." So I want to just personally invite each and every one of you and your families and friends to join us at this incredible event on Sunday, February 6th at 5 p.m. We are going to be hosting at Cornerstone Church in Chandler. They're located on Alma School and Willis. And for more information, and if you'd like to promote the event, just visit us at nightofhopeaz.com. I put that in the chat. There you can download our digital media kit. You'll have promo videos, digital flyers, banners, things that you can put on social media or on your websites, email to friends and family, and really just raise awareness about the event. If you'd like to volunteer, we are also welcoming volunteers for the event. You can just click on the Get Involved menu at the top of that website, and there's a registration link to get signed up in an area that you'd like to serve that night, in addition to participating in this awesome event. So if there aren't any other questions, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer those for you. And we hope to see you there.
That's great. Thank you, guys. It's such a wonderful event. And we've had a lot of our police agencies participate. I know Chandler PD's there because we're in their own backyard, but it's just been terrific. And I think Chief Solberg from Gilbert spoke last year, and we actually had the chief of police from Chandler. So it was really wonderful. And we just appreciate the church coming together on this shared message. So Nise, thanks for all the work that you guys do, and just really appreciate that. I'm just going to end with some announcements. And does anybody else have announcements before I go? Anybody else want to add anything from your organizations or anybody else? Okay. Well, I'm proud to announce that VAST, in connection with CC's Hope and another organization that does equestrian healing for survivors, has just received a $53,000 grant from Dignity Health. We're very proud of that, and our portion of that is $16,000 to be used towards technology for law enforcement, and so that was perfect for today. So Chief Jessup, we'll see what we can do to help you out down there on the border, but also keep some of that local for my Mesa PD guys, and we are just excited that our work continues to be valued and that we get to contribute to this huge problem. And Dominique, I just have to shout out to you. We've been on this a very long time. You and I haven't aged at all. We've gotten just younger as this has gone on. And she and I started on the last Super Bowl working on this together. So the fact that we have another one coming just reminds me that there's a lot of knowledge on this call, and a lot of people that have contributed a lot over the years. And everyone's contribution is valuable. And we're just so grateful that you've taken your time today. We do not have a location yet for March 2nd. I do want to do the meeting in person because there's a lot of different things that we want to share that we want people to take away from the meeting. As soon as we have that location, we will send it out to you, but it'll be the same time. And I just want to thank you all for being here. Is there anything else, last call, that anyone else wants to add to this call? Okay, well, you guys have a very blessed afternoon, and just thank you. And we hope to see you on February 6th at Cornerstone.
Stay connected to Mesa Chamber social media, email newsletters, Monday morning message, and mesachamber.org to always know what's happening at your Mesa Chamber.